I wanted to start with something that you might be able to relate to. If you are in the sandwich generation, or you're approaching it, or you see it on the horizon, um, you might have to do this. You might be thinking about already, do I have to have the car key conversation? And this is like a terrifying conversation, because this is about talking to our parents about taking some independence away from them. But at some point, someone might have to have that conversation. And a lot of times it falls to the adult children. So for me, this was about 2011. And my dad was just, I mean, he was a great, great dad. And he taught me how to drive, eh, but he wasn't doing it real well. And he wasn't doing a lot of driving. My mom actually was doing most of the driving, but my dad would take his car and go out of his little senior retirement neighborhood and go get his Starbucks, right? This was his thing. And a lot of times it was because my dad wanted to get something chocolatey. And my mom would have said, "No, Charlie, you can't have that." So this was his way to get away and his way to get his little sweet tooth on. And I just I just worried so much because I'd been driving with him and he scared me. He did not have the um, cognitive ability anymore after having a stroke 15 years later, and then some TIAs, some mini strokes. His reaction times were really, really slowing. He also had a variety of other physical limitations now where he just couldn't move that foot over to the brake. And I was so worried about him harming someone. So I contacted his doctor first. I looked up on lots of different websites. How do you do this? How do you have the car key conversation? I wrote to his doctor. His doctor said, I can have the DMV send him something, so he has to take a test. We do that. He passes the test because he is a good driver. And for a DMV test, you drive around the block. Not a problem for my dad. But I just worried some more. And I waited. I talked to my brother and sister. Some of them pushed back. One of my in-laws pushed back and said, "Oh no, he's fine." But I was in the neighborhood and I knew how he was doing. So I had to step up. So I talked to him and I just led with my heart, and I told him how much I loved him and how much I appreciated what he had done for me and teaching me how to drive and about cars. But I said, "Dad, you going up to Starbucks is a 5-minute trip, and I'm afraid you could get hurt." And he said, "I'm not worried about getting hurt. Whatever happens to me happens to me." I said, "But Dad, you could take out 5 people along the way. And I know you can't live with that." And he was quiet and he thought about it. And I knew I couldn't just take his keys, right? This is like Grand Theft Auto, right? Just taking his keys without any legal authority. But I couldn't argue with him. So I just said, "Dad, I love you. If you and I are driving together, I'll be the driver. And my hard rule is you can't drive with my kids in the car if you're the driver. That would have to be Mom." And he waited for a minute and he said, "Thank you, Christy. Thank you for telling me this." And it was hard. By this time, I'm sobbing. But I left it there. And within a month, my dad gave up driving. And we worked through how he could get around to places he wanted to go and how we could schedule those things, because his independence was also really important to him. But I share this with you because this was my introduction to, oh my gosh, I'm in the sandwich generation. At this point, I had no idea. I was thinking, well, this is just how things are. But as I started to see, I had to take more and more control and management of their care. So I want to, as Jessica shared with you, sandwich generation is children in your home, and these could be adult children. It could be grandchildren, and you're caring for aging parents in some level. Right now in 2020, after this pandemic, really lots of families have moved in together. And many were doing that already, but this has been a huge shift for people. So we've really seen lots being uncovered with this pandemic. Many parents have not saved well. They haven't managed their finances well, and then adult children are having to step in and share some of their resources. And this is really difficult for a lot of families. For me, I had it really well. My parents had saved money and it was still hard. So there are lots of different wrinkles to this sandwich generation piece. It's not just the difficult conversations. But I do want you to think about, or at least how I want to shape this for you, is that there's 4 aspects that I think are important to consider when we're looking at if we're in this or we're seeing it on the horizon. And the first aspect is you. It really is all about you. If we don't take care of ourselves, we can't show up for our children or our parents. And in the sandwich generation, you're going to be pulled. There are going to be times when your kids' needs are paramount and you need to show up for those. But it may fall at a time when your parents need you too. And what do you do to take care of that? And what happens for a lot of people is, in terms of self-care in this time period, the thought process is, I can't stop to take care of myself because everybody needs me. But the bottom line is, if you don't take care of yourself, if you don't show up for yourself, then everyone else loses. And so I call this ruthless self-care, right? Because if it was our children, we would be ruthless about taking care of them. But we don't always get ruthless with ourselves. Like, okay, I'm going to have a hard no here. I'm going to absolutely make time for this here. So this is a really important aspect, is looking at what are you doing for yourself. The next is really your children. And a lot of books out there, like when I started looking into this, they were great information about how to care for my parents. What could I do for them? How do I manage this aspect, finances, medical, advanced healthcare directives, this great information. Very few of these pieces of information talked about what the impact was on children. So as a school psychologist, I naturally thought about, okay, what's this doing with my kids? What's the impact here, right? Because it feels oppressive to me. How is that showing up in how I parent my children? Is this just a burden that we're all going through? And I really had to think about that and work through in my mind, how can I shift my thinking on this such that my children can really see the beauty in still being really close to their grandparents as they're fading away? Because really, the end of the story is, we all know what's going to happen. Each and every one of us will die and pass away. And that's a hard thing to wrap our heads around, but that's what's happening. Another aspect is your team. And that is really the first step. It's like, kind of, after you've taken care of yourself and thought about your kids, you really have to start to build a team. And who is that going to be? It could be as easy as neighbors that can help with carpooling. It could be making sure that you get to know your parents' doctor. There are a lot of little things that I think are really important. Discussing with your siblings, if you have them, who's taking care of what. And I have opinions on that, but every family is different. So you really have to look through that. But your team is who's taking care of you or helping to take care of you, and who's there that you can call on to help you when you need some backup. And then the last aspect is your communication. And I tried to share in my car key conversation that really taking time to think about how you're going to have this conversation is a really important piece of the puzzle. There are a lot of difficult conversations you're going to have with family, with your parents, with your children. And if you walk into those without having taken the time to really think about how you're going to process this and show up as your best self, it could go haywire, right? I mean, the car key conversation is not one you want to have at the Thanksgiving dinner table, right? So you got to think about timing and thinking about how you're going to walk into this. So I think how you shape your communication around some of these areas is really important. So there are some unique stressors for the sandwich generation that I wanted to talk about, but I want to stop for a minute and see if anybody had any specific questions or comments or reactions. Everybody have the car key conversation yet? No.
Anyone willing to share on that?
And you can throw that up in the chat too. That's fine. All right. So
sure.
Let me talk. Oh, yeah.
Well,
I guess, yeah, my conversation hasn't been a car key conversation, but just other, like the late 60s, early 70s, like healthcare navigation and like estate planning. Gosh, those are such hard conversations. Helping them refinance their mortgage, helping them with phone plans, and again, some of the other harder things. And I think it was helpful to think about how they parented me with so much care. And like you
Yeah,
said, like, they were ruthless parents. They were going to fight for anything I needed.
yeah,
And I just had to try to flip that mind and do that for them.
yeah. Well, and you really touched on something that is, my book is entitled Building a Legacy of Love, because like you, I had parents who were just wonderful. Listen, they weren't perfect. There's no such thing as a perfect parent, but I had it really good. I had a good relationship with them, and I was the trouble kid. I was the one who gave them all the trouble, but we still had a great relationship. Um, but yeah, I looked at, I want to transmit a legacy of love to my children, and they're going to see how I treat my parents right now. And I'll talk about that a little bit later, but that was it. It's like, if we've had those good relationships with parents, then this is an opportunity to look at how we can pass that on to our own kids. If we have not had a great relationship with our parents, this might be an opportunity to work on some resolution and some coming together, possibly some forgiveness, or at least acknowledgement and moving on, so that we then also don't transmit any negativity down to our children. Like, this is how all families work. So there's always this opportunity in this time period, I think, if we keep our children in mind, what are they seeing? I have a phrase I use a lot, and that is, children are always learning. We're not always intentional about what we're teaching, because we're just kind of acting and they're seeing things. But you hit on another one, and this is the first unique thing, is having money talks, right? So, with our kids, we're going to train them a little bit, hopefully teach them about money management. Hopefully, maybe you do allowances with your children, or they learn about saving. But if you have to go back and repair really bad money habits for your parents, this is a tricky thing. This is a really tricky thing. And how do you do that? But I would say early, in terms of communication, earlier is better with the financial talk. So you do need to do sort of some detective work if it's not open and clear. Where are they financially? What do they need? What's available to them? There are actually a lot of things that you can do to leverage their assets or their estate. If you needed to be able to have them get Medicare assisted living at some point. So there's a lot of different things that need to happen. And all of this is different in some wrinkle in every state. But it's important to just really get a money talk going. Again, not at the Thanksgiving dinner table, not on Super Bowl Sunday. Really find the right time. And this is one you're going to have to revisit. And then also find what's documented. This is also a time for you to think about you. Like, this was a wake-up call for me and my husband. We thought, well, we don't really even have our will yet, so let's get that down. We had some things, but we developed our trust during this time. So it really gave me a heads up to, what do I need to do to be able to pass something on to my kids?